the pair.
Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. 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 Parrot TV.
The Literary Corner, brought to you by New York Parrot TV, the voice for humanity. Hi, welcome to New York Parrot's Literary Corner. I'm Dustin Pickering, your noble and honest host. This is episode 215. Thanks for being with us on this long journey into literati and the global scene of creative writing and creativity. Today we have Jake St. John, who lives in the woods on the edge of the Salmon River. He is author of several collections of poetry, including Night Full of Diamonds from Whiskey City Press 2021, Snow Moon, Holy and Intoxicated Publications 2019, and Lost City Highway, a Jabber publication 2019. He is the former co-editor of Flying Fish and the former editor of Elephant. He is considered an original member of the New London School of Poetry. His poems have appeared in print and in online journals all over the world. Thank you for joining us today, Jake. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So I'm curious, what is the New London School of Poetry? What does that mean, and who are some of its members?
The New London School was a term coined by Tom Weigel back 2006, 2007. New London, Connecticut's always had a art music background.
Mm-hmm.
And then Tom was, and I could talk about Tom forever, but Tom was running a poetry reading out of a small cafe. And I had just gotten off the road from driving cross country. I popped into the cafe, and there's a whole story about that. Started reading poetry with those guys, and there's poets like Dave Kennedy was there, and Tom Weigel, Simon Pettit from New York popped in, John Landry from New Bedford. So there was Dave Spinelli, Jamie Duquette, Tracy Hollins. There was this group of poets that just kind of came together all at the same time, and everybody was kind of trying to make their bones and had their own view of poetry. And at that time, like, there was like a 5-year span where New London poets were popping up and all over in different magazines. And Tom came from New York with the New York School and everything, so it kind of coined itself. And then Joel Daly down in New Orleans, he ended up doing a whole New London School issue of Fell Swoop. So it's it was a pretty cool time in New London.
So it's the New London School. It's more based on location rather than any particular aesthetic that the group proposes.
Yeah, that was one of the main things. I know, like, with a lot of the schools, they're working in similar ways, but with the New London School, it was kind of because there were even poets from New Bedford that I would consider New London schools. They were our sister city up the coast, and everybody's kind of doing their own thing with poetry, but we're doing it together.
Right.
We're kind of learning from each other. We're all just starting out. We'd all kind of recently discovered poetry, and we were kind of in that middle area where we either weren't in school, we just gotten out of school, and we didn't really have a lot going on except poetry and art, and kind of living and having a good time together, and then creating together.
Interesting. So is there any do you find that amongst the poets in the New London School, are there any convergences of thoughts in the way that poetry should be appreciated or written?
Honesty. I think that's one of the main. No matter who was doing, if it was abstracts, whatever was going on, even with the songwriting, it had to do with it. If you're being honest in your work, then that was kind of the thread that would tie everything together in a way. Honesty was a big thing. Being genuine, not just reading, not just having time for yourself, but reading other poets, helping other poets, discussing art with it, just trying to learn craft and learn, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? And Tom, he kind of captained the ship. He would give books. You should be reading Bob Kaufman. You should be reading Ted Berrigan. Go read some Anne Waldman. He knew what everybody needed to read, and that kind of pushed everybody. Like some people were writing poetry and now they're in a band or things like that. It was just kind of a lot of people wanting truth. It was a weird time. It was a lot of kids. We were all coming of age in a way, and just wanted honesty for once. I guess that I would say.
Right. Yeah. So poetry is a force for unveiling the truth. And do you find that a lot of it's interrogations with the realities you're surrounded with? It's like, there's so much falsehood and pretension and just in general, just ingenuous, disingenuous, thoughts going around, and you just kind of get to the point where it's so frustrating, because you can see through the crap, but you can't really do anything because it's just ubiquitous, I mean, yeah. And it's today, even today, people are still the same way, So did that circumstance, was there like a social or political situation that sort of united you guys, to write poetry?
I think, Tom would tell us, don't be political in your poetry, but poetry in itself is political.
Right.
And I think a lot of us, like, we grow up with a lot of like that post 9/11, and it was kind of like, I'm trying to figure out the right words here. Like we're sick of people just feeding crap every night. Like it seemed like we grew up in a world where it was yay rah rah with rhetoric this and rhetoric that, and like not just we, but like there were bands and there are other artists. It seemed like the whole town, as most of the country at that point, just wanted somebody to tell you the truth. It didn't even have to be good news. Just, we want to hear the truth. We want to know the real thing. And yeah, there definitely were the political poets, the subversive, like, I'm not a political poet, but actually read this poem, and I am a political poet, even though I'm going to tell you I'm not. And I think even just when you're being honest about your life, you're going to be political anyway. I mean, especially today, it's very to be steadfast in what you hold dear and your opinions. I mean, that's political action in itself, to be honest.
Yeah, I think the fact that politics, what we call politics, is, it's a matter of policies and, what the government's doing and civic responsibilities and things like that. But I think in a way, the reason poetry is so embedded in it is it's also an orientation to the world. And in that sense, you want to make known who you are and what you think, and the integrity of what you actually think. Is at stake. A lot of times you're told, as you said, the rhetoric out there, the government's telling you something, society's saying something, you look through it and you go, man, that's not what's going on. People believe whatever they're told, or they parrot it. And so poetry has this power to just say, listen, I'm having a conversation here with you, honest to good, a conversation out of good faith. And I want you to hear this, And so people, if they were open to that, thought process, I think we could be a better society in general if people were to just think of things as, we're not looking for power or persuasion so much as just honest conversation.
Yeah.
So was that something that was kind of embedded in the New London School of Poetry?
Yeah. I would say another thing that tied us together was it seemed to be academics versus the street poet. I'll say the
Uh-huh.
not the person that just picked up an Al Winans or a Jack Micheline poetry book and said that this is the poem I want to read, rather than like
Right.
you've mentioned before, like here's another poem about flowers type of thing. Like if you, we, we
Right.
always talked about that if you want to read the news, go. If you want to hear what the news is, go read a poem. Go read a
Mhm.
contemporary, because you're gonna find out the news. It might not be the news that is on TV, but it's what's going on in the main vein of America.
Right. So what can poetry say beyond the writer's own perspectives and influences? Do you think it's possible for a person to really step outside and really grasp another point of view, or another, through empathy, to see what other persons are seeing and not inflict your own, narrative into something? I mean, there's a lot of discussion about misappropriation or misrepresentation. Is there a way to sort of transcend that and go beyond that, and portray other thoughts in poetry beyond one's own thoughts, one's own perspective?
Um, I think it's tough because I feel like as a writer, wanting to write, you want to write what your from your point of view, but at the same time, like I I, I think you always do have to. I think empathy is a major point of being an artist. You need to understand how the reason that somebody's feeling this way, the reason that or why they're not feeling this way, and is that is that a result of who we are? Is that a result of who they are? Um, Trying to write from another angle, I think you can write from situations that involve many angles. I think it's a tough thing. I think I wouldn't want to write from somebody else's experience. I'm only going to write from what
Right.
I know, what I've lived, I guess is how I would put it.
Makes sense. I mean, it really is a very personal thing to write poetry, and if someone has something to say, if a poem is written and someone thinks, well, that's not quite how it is. I mean, they have the option of writing what they think, and then you have and that's really that's the presentation. I mean, that's the world stage at play. Everyone has something they want to say or something they want to convey to people through poetry. I'm also curious about, you seem to travel a lot. Do your works, in your poetry, do you talk a lot about your travels, and is there any particular kind of stories that you present? I'm thinking personally, I'm thinking of Travels with Troy by John Steinbeck.
Yeah.
That kind of makes me think of like writing about travel. I loved that book when I read it. It was amazing.
Yeah, I'm a teacher, so I get a lot
Uh-huh.
of time in the summer to do things, and I was lucky enough to be able to scrape money together and do 2 different cross country trips, spending time in different areas, trying to experience different things in different parts of the country, and there's a lot of beauty in America. There's a lot of suffering too, but there's a lot. Um, get out of your comfort zone and go and
Right.
see what other people are doing. And yeah, like there's a lot. My first full length book, the Lost City book, deals with a lot of the traveling that I did for like the first 10 or 15 years. And then the last book was kind of more, I guess it was more of a travel in my head kind of realization of who I am type of spiritual traveling, I guess, in a way. But uh,
Interesting.
I do enjoy getting out there, and like there's nothing more tempting than getting out on the road.
Yeah, you get kind of restless and you just want to get out and move around. So, as a teacher, I'm curious, do you think that being a poet, can you instruct a person on being a poet, or is that something that they just are?
I think you just, and this is gonna sound like the answer. There's a lot of layers. Like I really believe, like myself, you are a poet. It's something like it's not getting the words out, because anybody can get the words out. You can practice. You can
Mm-hmm.
write a poem. It might not be honest. It might be from somewhere else, and like that shows through. But I think you're born a poet. You kind of see things differently, feel things differently. I know I've talked to there's a poet, Dave Kennedy, and I've talked to him about it. Like, what I can't many times where I was like, man, I'm fed up about this. Why don't they see this? Why don't they see this? And he was like, because they don't get it. Like poets, like I'm feeling the same way as you. It's we get it. You kind of see. I don't want to say you see the whole picture, but like you feel the honesty and everything. You see the
Mm-hmm.
truth, what's not the truth, and but at the same time, like you can teach the skill. You can
Right.
teach someone how to write a limerick, how to write haiku, but I don't think you can teach someone how to see like a poet or feel like a poet or read like a poet. Without I'm trying not to put the ego out there, but like it's I like sometimes you just talk to people, and like I talking to people, and I'll say that guy's a poet, and probably
Mm-hmm.
never wrote a word down in his life, but like inside, that guy's
Mm-hmm.
a poet. He gets it.
Right. Yeah, I think poets are like, the whole universe is in them, so in some capacity, or they recognize that. Maybe it's true that everyone has that in them, but it's like, the poet just sort of has this relationship to it that
Yeah,
is very different than 99% of humanity. I mean, people want to squabble over, scraps and stupidities, but poets, I mean, I'm thinking Jonathan Swift and Gulliver's Travels, how he's ridiculing the whole attitude of people just wanting to fight over nothing. In certain parts of the book where he, over the what side of the egg do we break on, and how do we cook it? Just they want to get into wars over this kind of stuff. And, poets are looking at it as like, why are you even doing that? Like, what's the point? Like there's this, sort of storm and fury of life that, and then they get into the bigger picture and think, well, this conflict has a purpose too. It's a very interesting way of, like what I would prefer life to be and what life actually is totally different thing. And I think as poets, we have those feelings, and we recognize and empathize with the fact that it's just everything's not cut to be what it is and we want it to be.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. Like I think poets, po- poets, I think get a bad rap a lot of times where people are like, oh, another sad poet, but I think the poet sees the opportunity, the chant, like things might not be things might not be great, but they really could be great if we could all get together and like understand this, or this isn't the problem we need to be fighting. We need to be talking about this, and this. And I think poets find the pain and the anguish in realizing that there's so much potential for humanity that it's
Mhm.
frustrating when it's all getting tied down for just ridiculous reasons, power reasons, and things like that.
Right. What is the most interesting or some of the most interesting experiences you've had that you've not written about?
Um, I think one of the most interesting experiences was I never wrote a word about. Well, I might have wrote a line or two in an older poem, but um, just driving out west, my experiences getting caught in a storm in middle of the night and out on the border, Arizona, New Mexico area in the petrified forest, camping out there and getting stuck in some terrible weather and running through the desert at night with lightning and cell phone going dead. It was a wild time, and I don't think I ever put that experience into words, only because I didn't know what words to make the reader feel what I felt, and I'm not sure how that experience would relate to somebody else. I'm sure at some point it'll come into play, but that was always a unique experience being down on Bourbon Street. Well, one of the coolest things was I was down on Bourbon Street, totally lost track of time back in 2004 when the Red Sox were on their World Series run, and there was it was the A-Rod Veritek fight, and I remember going into a bar to go check that out, and there was a bunch of Boston fans from New England, so it was this like New England South and down in New Orleans, the camaraderie and everything. It was, I mean, Bourbon Street itself, there's probably more memories down on Bourbon Street that I forgot about than I probably should have wrote about them before. But yeah, I think like there was one time on Bourbon Street that like just it's so vivid. Bourbon Street, it's just shoulder to shoulder. And I came around and I was trying to get someplace quick, and I came around the corner and there was just this snake in my face. This guy had a snake wrapped around his hand, and he was standing next to the guy. So I came around the corner, and I mean, there was a snake right there. Not being a fan of snakes myself, that kind of caught me off guard. But like, it's stuff like that. Like, where else can you get a snake in the face walking down the middle of the street? So there's a lot of interesting things out there, a lot of cool things that I've got to experience.
How do you see your work evolving over the years?
I can almost like go back and like read different poems and see like, all right, this was I was 20 something here, 20 something there. Like when I started writing, I got into poetry because of Jim Morrison. I got into Jim, and then from there branched out. So from him, I got to Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg. And that's how I discovered the beats. So I was heavy on the beats, not really like reading the poems and kind of getting them, but not really, not real. There wasn't that one poem that like jumped out. And then as I got to meet other poets, Al Winans sent me his book, The North Beach Poems. It was the updated poem. And I remember opening that book up, and this was after I'd been in New London, like experimenting with some surreal poetry and some haiku and things like that. And then seeing reading Al Winans' North Beach Poems, like seeing the common language, like these sketches of these down and out people, and you read them and like they're down and out, but there was like a beauty in the humanity of them. And that was one of the books. Like there's very few books that really have that, like, oh my God, this book was written for me. So once I read that, and then like Al, I kind of learned about Micheline from Al, and just all different books. Like then it would go like once I learned about Micheline and like Winans and Bukowski and different, like I was able to pick up different things. So I think I went from a very rudimentary, crude, almost like surrealist, abstract impersonator to finding my voice and trying to paint sketches of just a snapshot of the day, a snapshot in life of something that might just look like a campfire to you, but it's actually all these other things to me and all these other things to other people, or a couple of sunflowers wrapped around a stop sign. Like I think I was able to really get the vision, and kind of like I knew I wanted to write poetry. I just didn't know what poetry I was going to write. So I think I've constantly evolved, continuously, which I think as a poet, you can't help but evolve. The more you read, the more poets you're reading, the more stories you're reading, the more people you're talking to, your work is going to evolve over the years.
So I think, I'm not sure about this, but are you also a musician?
No.
Okay,
I have written some poems and collaborated with musicians who have turned some of my poems into music. But I don't do much music at all.
Okay, because I thought I had read somewhere that you played some music, or that you. I know you. I mean, it makes sense because you did some collaborations. It may have been, online somewhere that I found some collaborate. So, what kind of collaborations did you do? What sort of music styles did you take on?
There was a band called the Weird Beards back in New London. They were a cool group of guys. They have some wild videos all over YouTube. That band's still in a different. I guess it's in flux. They all kind of have different projects now. But we would do a lot of. They play an instrumental, maybe in between a song, linking songs together, and I get up there and I read a couple of poems while they were jamming out. And then Bruce McDermott, he's a folk writer, folk poet from the area. He's taken a couple of my poems and put them on a couple of his albums with his excuse me, with his folk band and everything. So that's always been fun. Like I've always enjoyed trying to write a song, and then so hearing somebody sing the words that I wrote and sing them the way I heard them in my head is always kind of cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I wonder how you feel when you have the your work transposed with music in the background, or when you reading. Do you feel that when you're reciting it over a musical background, does it change your entire intonations and way of presenting it?
Oh yeah. Like depending on the mood, depending on the music, going faster, going slower. So like the cool thing, like I wrote this one poem, Satori, and I wrote it. And when I wrote it, it was this dark, gritty, dirty in the gutter type of poem in my head, and that's how I got it out. And when it became a song, it was like a country song going down these dusty roads, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that's really cool!" Like I really dug it. But it's just interesting how the words can mean something different. But yeah, I've always enjoyed I've had people playing guitar, and we've always artists get together and create art. So somebody might have bongos, somebody might have a guitar, harmonica, somebody might start singing, and so it all depends on the rhythm, the tempo, things like that, and you just get into it. It's definitely something I'd like to experience again.
Yeah, we normally go to a break, but I believe the producer is a little bit lost. They may have gotten disconnected. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask if you'd like to read a couple of your poems.
Sure, absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Get some of that sort of beat grit mixed with a little surrealism, maybe. With a country song in the background.
These poems are from my new book, Night Full of Diamonds.
Okay.
Inishmore, it's a bar in town. Inishmore. I'm at an Irish pub in Colchester, alone and waiting for my burger. But the bartender had my beer waiting for me when I walked in. Every so often, after kicking you in the gut for months on end, the universe relents and sees to it that you have a remedy to ease the pain. That's Inishmore. This poem is titled Recedes. The sun recedes like my hairline. My joints tighten like the hangman's noose before executing dreams. Youthful shadows collapse after a long day's work and fall across broken sidewalks that lead nowhere. Neighborhoods boarded up by lack of attention, with keys still in the door. Bones at a desk, ground to dust by clocks, while curtains blow like white flags in empty rooms, surrendering to the armies of history. And this is this bed. You dream of my heart, flower of my earth and soul, blooming in a forgotten garden of weeds. You stretching heavenwards towards a desolate sun hanging in a soft sky. You dream of my heart, flower of my earth and soul. Don't return to dust and clay when stars fall. Leave your petals and your thorns for me. I want to hold all of you when night descends upon this bed of brush and tangled vines. That's his bed.
Interesting. That's a very earthy poem. Makes me think of a little bit of Pablo Neruda in a way.
When I was writing this book, I was going through there were some life changes, and I was reading the Captain's verses and
Oh yeah. Oh,
Gary Snyder's Rip Rap. So I definitely Don Pablo definitely has a major spirit hovering over this book.
absolutely. I mean, I can see the influences. His thing was he wrote about, one of his aesthetics was, writing about kind of a poetry of earth, the knit and grit and the dirt and the, all of the strangeness and the grandeur of nature. And he was pretty intensely focused on that. And that's interesting, kind of how his poetry ended up reflecting, like elemental odes, for instance, and you mentioned the Captain's verses. That book was an early influence on some of my work in the 20s when I was in my 20s. I read that book like 3 times, right at one after the next. I just kept reading it. And, I just started to see this very, intense structure to the way he discussed, like it's love poems, but it's also very patriotic in a way for Chile, and the liberation struggles. And there's all these underlying metaphors, social metaphors. And again, we get back to, political and personal and, how we have this orientation to the world. I mean, we can't even write love poetry without talking about, liberation and, and it's a very strange phenomenon, and that book just was like really interesting. It showed me how you can put a whole book together of poetry, and it's not just random, poems that you just string together. It's like there's an actual presentation involved.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I love I love having a collection of poems that each poem plays to the next. It's like there's a synchronicity to it, and I think the coolest thing that I want with Pablo, reading Pablo and like knowing that like he's so many different things all wrapped up in one. The senator, the political poet, the revolutionary, the love poem was when you can write a love poem and it doesn't have to be everything's perfect and flowers and everything. Like you would write not just about the good times. It was like there's also like the down periods of relationships and things like that. So the honesty, like it's all, not every relationship's perfect. There's ups and downs. So I always thought that was cool because you're always presented with these love poems where it's all flowers and petals and everyone falls in love. And at the end of the poem, everything gets tied up nice and neat in a little basket. And
Hollywood love story.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All like glitter, all prettiness and glitter. And you get to the real bane of it. Love is it's really not what a lot of we assume. Romantic love is just not exactly what is assumed of it, culturally speaking. I mean, people see it as a way out of their problems, and they idealize the their feminine or the masculine, whatever it is they want to, however they want to, if they're male or female or whatever their sexual orientation is, they idealize these relationships. And it's like, you kind of want to, think about that. And if you really have a good grasp, I mean, relationships are actually tons of work. They're tons of responsibility. They're burdensome, and they challenge you at the same time. I mean, I made a post recently on Facebook about, asking yourself why you would want to be in a relationship. What are your essential motives? And when you think about that, and when you look at it, when you're from that angle, then you wonder if you really need to be in a relationship. You don't think about it as this is my way out. I'm lonely and depressed, and my life's struggles are bothering me. And if I just marry somebody, it'll all go away. It's like that's not how it is.
Yeah.
Sometimes you invite more problems by getting in a relationship. You complicate things. You throw another person on top of your problems. But there's something that's so beautiful about it. It's just like life. It's life. All the complications and the the beauty all therein, and it's just very weird process, and we like to put this layer of golden glitter over a lot of things that really aren't what they seem to be. I mean, the same thing with like rosy ideals we have, whether it's political like communism or capitalism or whatever, all that stuff. It's like it's not all beauty and strength and glory. There's a lot of horror that's been based that those things have created as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's always the darkness just underneath the wit and the leftover, and it's the world's it's a weird thing. It really is.
Yeah, I think so. It's a very treacherous thing. And one of my favorite philosophers, Nietzsche, he was really good about saying, things like, how once you go under the surface of the appearance, even the most beautiful thing, it's got this hidden, darkness and this hidden treachery to it.
Yeah, I that just made me think Michelin's quote. He talked about like, and I think this interview's on YouTube somewhere, but he said, everybody's walking around just looking down, and like when you're looking down, you're just seeing what's on the ground. Nobody's looking up, nobody's looking at the moon, nobody's looking at each other in the eye, and you look up and maybe you see something you wouldn't always see, and maybe that changes your perspective and your view of something. And I've always thought about that, because a lot of times, like when you're going through life, like you're focused on whatever it is happening with you. But if you are looking up and you're looking around, you're going to see that what's happening to you is happening to other people. And there's all these relationships and connections that are out there that you might not necessarily make unless you're opening up some empathy, opening up some line of communication. And that just made me, the way you brought that up, it made me think of Michelin's quote there.
Are you familiar with a poet named T. Kilgore Blake?
I don't
He's
think
modern,
so.
contemporary. Yeah, he's sort of in that circle. Like he's a big fan of Brodigan, and some of the poets you've mentioned. The names are familiar to me from him. I believe he's in Michigan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's an older gentleman, and he has an interesting story about how he became a poet. And I just mentioned that because he's he's kind of seems of the same spirit, and I see him published along with Michelin and people like that. Yeah, he's the Rusty Truck, the guy behind.
Okay.
Yeah, he's published in there. If you ever have any editions,
I'll go check it out.
See if you can find his name. He's a really fascinating person. I've published several of his books, and he kind of brought me into that culture.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you have any books in mind for the future that you're putting together now?
Right now, like I've still been pushing the Whiskey City book. It was a book I was real proud of, and then came out like right at the beginning, right towards the middle, and then right towards COVID starting and everything. So never done any readings. I never promoted it, never did anything. So I'm still kind of working on that. Poems are coming. They're coming along here or there. I don't have any imminent books or projects because I still I don't know. As a writer, I don't know if you ever feel this way, but like my first book took me like 15 years to get everything in order, all the poems and everything, and then this Night Full of Diamonds was it was like an 18-month span where I was just firing out. There was a lot going on in my life that was conducive, and I was getting everything out on paper, and it happened so quick and so fast, and like there was like this euphoria of like just everything hitting all at the same time. And then like once the book came out, it was kind of like, and my gas tank's empty. And Kay McDonough once told me, like I was venting to her because, well, when you're a young poet, like when you're not writing, like you kind of feel like I'm a failure. I at least I did. Like 2 days have gone by and I haven't written a poem. Like I'm a failure. I'll never do this. And so I was venting to her. She was over the house, and I was like, I kind of feel like a bum right now. Like I don't have anything. I can't write. I feel like fraud. And she was like, you've got life. Life's happening all around you. Like you're you're filling up your gas tank. When your gas tank's full, then you'll write. Right now, the part of the writing process you're doing is you're living, you're experiencing. All of that will transfer itself onto the page when it's ready to. So I try to hold on to that, where right now I kind of have everything's kind of wide open. There's a couple different projects that have been talked about here or there, but nothing I'd be willing to put my name or attach anybody else's name to right now. But I'm hoping soon, because I don't like going too long without having something going on.
Yeah, I get restless too when I'm not doing some kind of creative work. It really gets frustrating. It's like, it's exhausting. I mean, I feel exactly the same way when I'm not writing or I'm not putting something creative together. I just feel restless, you know?
Yeah.
So what would your final message to the viewers be?
Go and read poetry. Find something, and like just go and find different poets that you wouldn't normally read. Ask different people, like, what are they reading? Read a book, go out, meet somebody, have a cup of coffee, live life, you know? Like, find poetry that if you remember reading it in high school, don't read it. Go find something else. Find something that you have never read before, and maybe it'll unlock some kind of door.
I think that's true. You know, just you know, when some of my schizophrenia got on me in my early years and my 20s, it pushed me out of my bounds. Like, for some reason, I became very fearless and trying to, you know, I remember I was on a bus on the way to Mississippi, and there was this guy with a guitar case, and I just kind of walked up to him. I said, "Hey, do you play guitar?" And he's like, "Yeah." And it turned out he played in some kind of, you know, in some sort of satanic metal band. And he was coming to open a show for a band that I had actually been listening to at the time. And I talked with him, you know, it was interesting. And that just, like, for some reason I was compelled to just live. And at the time I'd been in shell, you know, and there's so much life out there. I totally agree that we should be willing to, you know, kind of be flexible and open to things. And, you know, I feel like, you know, post 9/11, as you mentioned, we're being locked down. I mean, totally, like, you know, since then it's been like hell on earth for everybody, because we, you know, had all the, you know, spying and, you know, government stuff going on with them, and the fear of the whole event and not knowing what's next. And now we've got the lockdown, the COVID lockdown. Just gradually our ability to live life is being chipped away at.
Yeah, it's, you know, like last 2 years kind of just, it's a different world now. Like it was, at first, it seemed like we were going into this sci-fi world and this new government state, and it never got better. It just keeps rolling on, and like, it can't let it. You got to be safe, but you also have to experience and live and get out of your comfort zone. Go do something you wouldn't normally do. I am very big on live, experience. It's always worth the experience. The experience, if it passes you by, you can't get it again. Experience, go out, live, and experience.
Right. So would you like to have any shout outs or any thank yous for friends and fans and people who have supported you over time?
I'd like to thank John Greiner and Todd Cirillo. I've thanked them so many times for the work that they put into editing Night Full of Diamonds. John Patrick Robbins and Scott Simmons for the work that they did putting it together. Those four guys really got the book together. I mean, those are the guys I've been working with the last really in COVID, when this book was coming together. I've been doing a lot there. You know, John Patrick Robbins, he's been editing everything. He's got a lot going on, and Todd is just one of the best editors out there. Like, I trust my work with him anytime. Same thing with John Greiner. He gets it. I love getting work into other people's hands, and those two guys, their editing eyes are perfect. And for that matter, John Dombacher out with a Jabber publication out in Chicago. He put the first book together, Lost City Highway, and I couldn't have been more happy working with him. He was a fantastic publisher and editor to work with. So those 5 guys have really been pretty major for me the last couple of years.
Excellent. It's always good to have a great editor. That's my advice to all the writers out there. Find an editor, find a second pair of eyes on your work. Definitely do that. And in the meantime, we have Parrot Literary Corner, where you can discuss your work freely and openly, your perspectives on life, how they relate to your artwork and your vision. And you can also donate to our program at paypal.me/nyparrot. That would support us greatly in our production costs and help us move forward and advance our possibilities of what we're creating. So that's paypal.me/nyparrot. You can also reach out to me, Dustin Pickering, if you want to be a guest on the show at literary.corner@newyorkparrot.com. That's my email address for this program. If you know people who'd like to be a guest, that's another way you could support us, is just like and share, love all of the content we put out. Subscribe to our YouTube. And again, if you know people who are writing, have the writing bug, have the poet's vision, or like to paint, do music, get in touch with me. As we want guests on this program. We do this daily. So literarycorner@newyorkparrot.com. So if you guys out there are still curious about this anthology we're doing, Series 2, we definitely want to hear from you. It will be out December 1st. We're looking for submissions until November 15th. If you've been on the program since the post Series 1 until now and until the 15th, we want to hear from you. We want your poems. We want your stories and your blood. I mean, I'm sorry, that was a Freudian slip. I don't want your blood. Please don't send it. But anyway, just keep a lookout for more news on that anthology. And just keep watching the program. Again, subscribe. Blink, blank, blank, and you'll be in touch with our content immediately as soon as it comes on live. You can leave comments. You can ask questions for our guests. And in the meantime, get out and get some writing done. Get some poetry written, get some stories written, and experience life to the fullest extent possible under these lockdowns. And hopefully this thing will be over soon, and we'll be back to a fair amount of normal, post-COVID pretty soon here. So without further ado, just go out, have a great afternoon, guys. It's a wonderful day. Have some sunlight on your face. In the New York Parrot Literary Corner, I'm Dustin Pickering. Just keep up the good work you guys are doing out there writing, spreading, the gospel of poetry. And, just keep talking about poetry. Keep sharing your work. Don't be afraid. Like I said, if you want to be on the program, you can get in touch with me, literary.corner@newyorkparrot.com. And keep in touch with me on this anthology as well. Just any questions you have, I'm on Facebook.
Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the parrot. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Parrot TV. Listen to the people. Listen to humanity. Listen to the